as I went round a roundabout, it turned so quickly and he went straight over the roundabout. Right, hello everybody, welcome back to the Wednesday Bike Club. So, what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to be talking about the problems that short riders have. And not just short riders, but people of sort of slimmer, smaller stature, if you like. But before I do that, I just want to bring the topic to Sean, the Mindful Motorcyclist. I don't know if anybody saw that video that he put up when he was coming into the port on his Triumph Rocket, and the lorry reversed back into him. Goodness me, did anybody see that? Absolutely frightening. And I did comment, I sort of sent a message on the comments to Sean about, I can't imagine the emotion in those few seconds. When you know something's going to happen, you've got no control over it. And God, what an extraordinary thing. I don't know what you thought about that, but yeah, amazing that he got to tell the tale from that, because that could end it so differently. So yeah, glad you're all right, Sean, but goodness me, wasn't that an extraordinary thing? And it's a good lesson, isn't it, to people to learn about, putting yourself in situations. And Sean was a long way back from that lorry to start with, a long way back. And things can change that quickly, can't they? It's amazing. But yeah, it's interesting to watch. But in hindsight, people can always say something different, but you weren't there. Sean was there in that moment, and he did absolutely the best he could at the time. Amazing, absolutely amazing. But there you go, such it is. But yeah, just want to say that, just something that stuck in my mind. So yeah. So what brought us about? We went out to the Crawley factory, Superbike factory, just to have a look at some bikes. We were sort of killing time really on a Sunday, and we've been meaning to do this for a long time. Is for Karen to go up and see what bikes were available that she could actually get on. And you know what? Out of all those bikes in that dealership, I don't know how many, it was sort of 300 odd bikes in there, something like that. I think there was 2 that she could pretty much touch the ground on. And by that I mean not just bikes that she could physically get on height-wise, but also manage, if you like. Because I think the problem also is, because a lot of people sort of said in the comments, so all I did is put a post up. Pardon me. I did put a post up, but a lot of people commented on that. So I said, "Oh yeah, what a nightmare, it is when you're a short rider." And a lot of people said, "Well, you could get on a Harley, these sort of low rider, this sort of cruiser style bike, which the Meteor's a bit like that." And that's fine, isn't it? As long as you want a rider cruiser. If you want to ride something else, whether it's a sports bike or we're going to have to talk about adventure bikes, but the problem with some of those cruisers, particularly the Harleys and stuff, they are heavy at the end of the day, and I think that's the other problem. You might get the height, but you're sacrificing the height for the weight. And I know some of the Harleys, the weight is low down, but the thing is, you come to an area. There's always like a trade-off, isn't there? There's this thing about you can't get my Harley. The side stand is a nightmare. Absolute nightmare. You've got to flick the darn thing out. You can't. It's so long you can't get it. So you've got to flick it out. And trying to do that with a 2,500 kilo bike is not much fun when you've now got one leg in the air. Try to do that. And I think that's the thing. You can find bikes which are not tall, but you sacrifice that for the weight you seem to. Or what happens is that you end up resorting to bikes which are much smaller. You start looking at 125s and you think, well, I don't want a 125. I passed my my bike test. I'm ready for a bigger bike. I've done the small bike thing with the 125s and stuff, and I want a bigger bike. Now I know from Karen's journey with biking, certainly when we met, she was riding a Triumph Street Triple, Gen 1 Street Triple, as you would have seen if you've seen the videos. And you think, well, that's quite a, not a tall bike, but it's a, you know, it's a regular size bike, let's say that. And she had to have that lowered. So the suspension, well, it wasn't suspension, I think it was dog bones on that were changed to lower it slightly for her. But even then she was still quite sort of tippy-toe-ish on that bike. And that was fine, and because the other thing was that bike was quite light, you know, it's a sort of naked sports bike, and it was designed to be pretty light. I can't remember what the weight was, but it was pretty light as a bike. It sort of had that similar sort of feel to my Ducati Monster, you know, it's the underpinnings are sort of a sports bike really, and it's quite light because of that, which makes it easier to actually then wheel it around and do that sort of thing. But the problem with lowering bikes like that, if you don't lower the whole thing properly, if you don't set it up with the front suspension and the front forks and you lower it properly, you can end up with upsetting the geometry of the bike, and it actually makes it difficult to ride, or it won't ride the way it was designed to be. And that becomes quite problematic. And the problem with that is that when you upset the geometry of the bike, it's going to behave in a way that it wasn't designed to. And this brings me on to another point, which I'll come back to actually, because it's quite a big point. So you're always compromised, aren't you? You're always compromised in the sort of bikes that you can have, which fit you properly, and you end up in this sort of like world where you can only end up riding cruisers or adapted bikes, and no one seems to be sort of paying attention to. And I know again it's this commercial thing that is such a small market, isn't it? No pun intended, but it's a smallish market that companies or manufacturers are not going to just build small bikes for people. They're just not going to do it. Now I know companies like BMW do try to address that, but because they do make proper lowering kits and things for their bikes, don't they? So it makes it, if you're the only company doing that, you end up with a fan base of people that think, well, that company's considering me, you know, so I'm going to stick with them. And that's a very clever thing on people like BMW's part, in that they do think, well, you know, if you make it inclusive, you build that family loyalty, which you get with brands, and companies like BMW get that. But I'll be interested to know what you've done. What have you done in the past? How have you got round this thing about, you know, if you're not the average height, you know, everything's average, isn't it? What do you do or what have you done to, when you bought bikes, how did you start selecting bikes? Karen does this thing where she walks around and she goes up, and if she does this, if it comes up to this, she knows she can't get on it. Because the other thing is, I've said this before, you have this problem with, it's not just the height of the bike, it's the width of the seat. The wider the seat, the harder it is to get your legs down. So you lose some of that advantage. You might get a bike which has got the right height in theory for you, but the seat is so wide you still can't use it. And then it is those other things that come into it, you know, the stand and all those things. You know, can you get it on the stand? Is it easy to maneuver around? And this is the other thing that, you know, I see this all the time with Karen, you know, going into parking spaces. You know, you have to really consider, can I get this thing back out? You know, is someone going to come behind me? Is it going to be awkward? Is it a bit gravelly and all the rest of it? Where Karen likes to go camping, you know, she has to really consider. She quite often might have to go and walk the ground first and think, can I get across this ground? Is it easy for me to do? Will I get the stand in? When I put the stand down, is it going to sink into the ground? Do I need to make sure I've got one of those stand pucks, you know, those puck things that you can get on the thing? Can I get it in position before I put the stand down? You know, people like me don't have that major problem. You know, we can sort of work it out. We can manhandle a bike round. But for shorter stature riders, that's a real problem. So what's the other problem I said I'd come back to? Well, it's a suspension. Now, there was something that made me think about this. It was quite a while ago, and it's something that sort of came to fruition. Talk something up. I'd watched a video ages ago, and it was a guy that does motorbike suspension, really clever guy. He's an English guy, but I think he works in America. And he was setting up, he had like a clinic type thing in there, and he was at a racetrack, and people were bringing their bikes to him while they were doing their track days, and he was setting up their suspension and stuff for them. And I remember there being a girl came up on I want to say it was an MT-07, and he said at the time, he said, this bike has an inherent problem in that the suspension, there's no sag in the suspension, no latent sag in the suspension. So by that, what I mean is, if you get off a bike, okay, and I had a terrible example of this, but if you get up off a bike, the bike should drop a little bit. It should, if you took a bike off a centre stand, it should just drop down a little bit. So you've got that little gap between the top, if you like, we used to call it in the car, bump stop of the suspension, where the suspension's at its longest travel, it can't go any higher. It's stuck, it stops there. But when you put the weight of the bike on it only, it should drop a little bit. And that's actually like a safety device, really, because as the bike is doing this on the road, it's going up and down. If it's constantly coming back up to the stop, the inertia of that coming to the stop has got to go somewhere, and it's actually you. And he likened it to being a second kiddie on a trampoline. As the trampoline comes up, you come off it. It's all inertia, isn't it? Because the weight is continuing up and carrying on. And this is the problem that you have with some of these bikes. And I think Yamaha had to address that problem because it was quite dangerous. Because if you're a very lightweight rider, and sometimes, you know, short and small goes with light, I suppose. Someone contradicts me on that. But you have that situation where if your suspension is always at the bump stop, if you like, or its limit, every time you go over a sensible bump, dunk, bang, as the suspension comes up, it goes stop, and you carry on. And that's when people get thrown over the bars with that. There's some interesting videos I've seen with motocross bikes or sort of trail bikes, and somebody going across, and it shows you about this thing about how suspension can't keep up with it and dampening and all the rest of it. It's really interesting, and eventually it throws you off. But yeah, the suspension's a really critical point, and it might be that you can fit on the bike, but if that suspension has no sag in it at all, you could really set yourself up for a major issue, because, as you know, our roads are so shocking at the moment. You go around some of these, and I'm going to bring in this thing with the heat at the moment. You know, we're in the middle of this heat wave, and we have this problem where, you know, our tarmac, I don't know what they make tarmac from these days, it's jelly or something, but it starts to melt and roads start to sag and sink in places, don't they? And you end up with these big sort of dips, this sort of stuff going on. And if you're going over those too fast and you're too light, you can come up to your stop on your suspension, and it's that throws you off. Now, I had that situation, it was partly why Karen crashed a couple of years ago now, on a street triple, partly because of that. So as she went over the sort of destroyed drain cover, the suspension struck that, and it threw her off, and that's the thing, you know, the only way you can really avoid that, if you're lucky, if you see it quick enough, is to stand up. And that, you know, that's not always easy for people, is it? It's particularly on a sports bike. But, you know, that there is this, you know, shorter, lighter riders have a real problem with selecting bikes, I think. And I think you don't get the opportunity to ride all those different bikes. And we were going to adventure bikes, you know. You look at the height of adventure bikes, they're a nightmare for people. We walked through that dealer on Sunday, and all the adventure bikes were too tall. All of them were too tall. Funny enough, the only ones we saw with adventure style, let's say, was, and I hadn't realised that, was the NC750. Now, that was the first model NC750. They did the 700, didn't they, and the 750. But those 750s, the early ones, they were white ones, absolute bog standard ones. They looked incredibly low. But I think some of that is because of the size of the wheels. They've got like Smarties for wheels, haven't they, NC750s? They really have. And they're really short, they're really small wheels. I've always thought that. I thought, why didn't they put bigger wheels on those? Because it'd make it a much more interesting bike. Even though I love the NC750 and I've had one. But that brings me on to the point we're talking about, suspension sag. The NC750, even though it's slow, the one I had used to bottom out. The suspension was terrible. And it's quite, I think the sort of mid-era NC750s were quite renowned for that. You could, if you went to a garage, to put some petrol in, you would get off the bike, we put it on a side stand, and the bike would sink like that. The suspension was so poor, it would just upright. And in the end, what I had to do with that, I had to change the rear suspension. I had to put new suspension in, which did improve it somewhat, but not massively. And I had to raise the bike. I had to put, I think it's shorter dog bones make it taller. And I put about 2 inches on that bike, which was great for the ride as such. It improved that. But what it did, it changed the angle, what do you call it? the angle of the wheels, basically, which meant that it turned much sharper. So by changing the angle, if you like the steering angle, if you like the upright angle, I can't even think of the word. It meant that the steering was much sharper, and I can remember doing that work on the bike, getting out, and I thought, I'm going to go for a ride. I thought, it's upright, this is great, isn't it? And as I went round a roundabout, it turned so quickly, I knew you went straight over the roundabout. It was so different. And that's, again, that sort of brings it back into this problem, of changing the geometry on bikes and things, and it's not what you want, is it, really? Because you're not riding the bike in the way it was intended, or it won't ride the way it was intended or designed. And I think that's really problematic. So yeah, it'd be interesting to hear from shorter riders and also lady riders and that. What do you do to get around these problems? How do you end up, do you end up just going, forget it? Or do you end up just sticking with the smaller bike, a 125 and all the rest of it? Because even the 350s, the bike that Karen's now using is the Hunter, but even then, what we did was I poorly sculpted the seat. So not to change the geometry of the bike, I just adapted the seat, made that, which means you can now get both feet down. Because I think if you had lowered that, if you changed the suspension and lowered it, it would have made the bike look incredibly squat and weird. And that's quite fast anyway, the steering on the Hunter. It's annoying I can't think of the name of the angle on the front there. Someone's going to tell me, or I'll put it up. But yeah, I did the seat just so that the bike would handle the same as it did before, as such. But what are you doing? What are you doing to do that? Are you, you watch people, you see some of these things with people riding GSs, and they're like, particularly ladies, shortish ladies, and there's one where you see that a lady, I think it's in Japan or something, she rides up to like traffic lights and jumps off the bike and then jumps back on again. It's like, it's nuts. But the rake angle, yeah. So yeah, changing the rake angle, when you change suspension up and down, all the rest of it, it changes the wheelbase as well. So yeah, it causes a lot of problems, I think. But yeah, that was today's thing. Yeah, what the problems for shorter riders? What the hell do you do? What the hell do you do? Do you just go with the cruiser, and even though there's nothing wrong with cruisers, but you have to sort of go, well, that's my selection, that's all I can do, or do you get a bit more inventive? I don't know, but I'd be interested to hear from you, see what you think. Right, have another sip of water. I think today's not going to be the hottest day. I think we'll already have 35. I think it's going to be 36 tomorrow. Oh dear. It's okay. I've been coming out early in the morning, even before work. We come out really early in the morning. It's been nice to do it like this, because I can still actually put a jacket on. So yeah, I don't mind the hot weather. I don't really mind the hot weather. It's the hot nights I don't like. I feel like that's a bit much. But thanks to everybody who's been subscribing to the candid photographer. So we've gone past 100 subscribers, which is great. I'm really pleased with that. I was out early yesterday morning down at Littlehampton doing some street photography with my £5 challenge camera. But yeah, thanks for subscribing if you are, and I hope you're enjoying it. But while this lorry goes past, I'll see you next week. And hopefully next week is going to be a lot cooler. I think we're going to have a massive thunderstorms by Friday. And it's going to be an awful lot cooler, isn't it? But I suppose we shouldn't complain, really. You know, it's not so bad, is it? It could be worse, couldn't it? Right, look after yourselves and I'll see you next week. Ride safe.